Welcome in. I'm Dave Trafford from Story Studio Network, and you're sitting in on the Creating Space. It's opportunities in Indigenous innovation. And today we are going to get into a wider conversation about engaging Indigenous peoples in Canada in the high-tech sectors. It's all about economic reconciliation to some degree. It's about economic development. And it's about opportunities on both sides of the ledger. So glad to have you here with us. We're going to be here for about 45, 50 minutes or so. And if you're watching on YouTube and you want to offer up a comment, feel free to do that as we go. So there's lots to talk about, lots to get to. We've got 4 guests around the table that we want to introduce you to. But first, we want to sort of set the table, why we're here, what this series is all about, the objectives of this. It's not about citing a whole bunch of complaints. In fact, it's about finding and dealing with solutions, addressing solutions that are good for the entire economic structure and foundation of this country. So to tell us more about why we're here, why the discussion is important, we throw it to Cam Holmstrom and Dan Demers from Niipaawi Strategies.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Creating Space. We're glad to have you join us and to take part in this conversation. First, we want to thank Dave for taking the time to moderate for us today. We really appreciate his participation and his hard work on this project. For us here at Niipaawi Strategies, this project was all about trying to help make ends meet and help people navigate through this space, whether that be through procurement, whether that be through technology, people getting involved in the tech sector, those trying to engage with Indigenous businesses, or Indigenous businesses trying to find their way through this space. We decided to start this series based on conversations we've been having for the past year and a half. People trying to find the best way forward, trying to find best practices. And that's what we decided to try to do, create this venue to help people come to the table and share. Dan?
We all know there's been many studies over the years and reports pointing out the challenges and solutions to advance economic reconciliation. There's no way we'd have time today to go over them all. But I do want to point out one common thread through them all, and that is whether it's civil society, businesses, or individuals, they've all come together to address economic reconciliation in a meaningful way. For Canadian business, this is in part because it's the right thing to do. But I think more importantly, because they increasingly recognize it's in their interest to do so. For Indigenous people, the benefits of greater participation in the Canadian economy, academia, and civil society at all levels are many. But I want to use one example in particular. We all know about the terrible employment gap between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. But interestingly enough, once you have a bachelor or post-secondary degree, there is no employment gap. The employment rate for Indigenous people is 82.6%. For non-Indigenous people, it's 82.5%. There is no gap. So we know education is key. Well, let's say you have the education. How do you then take that and advance that into full participation in high-tech economies, civil society, governments, corporations, or as entrepreneurs? Now, for the high-tech industries, there's a lot of benefits derived from including more Indigenous people as employees, as leadership positions, and as partners. This includes innovative ways to approach issues based on different perspectives, as well as access to an immense domestic talent pool. We all know Canadian industry is facing shortages in highly skilled workers, and yet we have this tremendous talent pool of Indigenous people who are ready, willing, and able to move into those positions. So as we advance our Canadian economy, it would be extremely short-sighted of industry not to take advantage of this tremendous talent pool. Now, we all know that, and we all know there's structures in place to address these issues, and yet we still face tremendous challenges. A study by Ryerson University on innovation and entrepreneurship found that only 2.2% of the Canadian tech workforce is made up of Indigenous people. As well, Indigenous people were less likely to be employed in professional occupations. Only 14.7% compared to 22% for the non-Indigenous people. So I want to thank all the participants for being here to build on that goodwill, to build on what, quite frankly, sometimes is very much self-interest, so that we can actually find ways to share best practices, take advantage of the foundations that are in place, and actually work towards meaningful, lasting economic reconciliation. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here today, and I want to thank Dave in particular for moderating today's session.
At the end of the day, we're glad you're joining us to take part in this series. and that at the end of the day, trying to provide you with resources and tools to help us all achieve this goal of having a better, stronger Canada that serves not just Indigenous peoples, but society as a whole. If after this is done, you wish to reach out to us, we are happy to have the conversation. Please come visit our website at niipaawi.ca, and we're always happy to see how we can help you reach your goals in your goals in the work that you do. Merci, miigwech. Thank you, merci, and let's get on with the show.
Thank you, Cam. Thank you, Dan. And Niipaawi is the driving force behind all of this. So again, thank you for igniting this conversation, because it is obviously clearly important to you guys in terms of the passion you bring to the work that you do. But also, I think, stepping out and making sure that the rest of us are paying attention. There's a lot of noise right now in a lot of areas. And so with everything that's going on in this country, this is a critical conversation to have. All right, let's get around the table. We welcome in Josh Nilson. He is at Maskwa Investments, and Josh is Métis from Willow River, BC. And among the cool things he's done is he was the founder of the mobile games like Trailer Park Boys. So we're going to want to get into some of that discussion with him. And we also welcome in Zaffia Laplante. She is the CEO of Hempergy. Well, Jen Harper is here. She's the founder of Cheekbone Beauty. And the notes I have here: award-winning social entrepreneur, but she's also the considered a revolutionary in her endeavors. So again, being an entrepreneur in this space at any time is tough. Be curious to see how she has managed to jump into that, which is fairly crowded, I would think, sector in terms of the cosmetics, etc. Katrina Reimer is here, a third-year engineering student from Queen's University. Swampy Cree from Attawapiskat First Nation, third year of mechanical engineering at Queen's in Kingston. Welcome to you all. It's great to have you around the table. And I throw this question out just generally right now to sort of set the tone. Both Dan and Cam talked about the importance of having the conversation. And Josh, I'll come to you first and just say, it's great that we're having it. But the one thing that kind of came up in terms of our prep for this series was, why has it taken this long to get to a point where we're having this conversation in a rather robust way?
Boomatan, good morning. Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's just been that a lot of people working in tech, Indigenous people working in tech, haven't been well represented or had leaders that we could look up to, and had safe spaces that we could work in and be our authentic selves as we kind of work in technology and entrepreneurship and creating these journeys.
Yeah, and where's the breakthrough have to happen, though, to make this more of a common conversation? Because when, again, Dan was talking about the number of Indigenous peoples involved in the high-tech sector, it's fairly, low. It's frighteningly low.
I'm from BC, so we did a survey for Indigenous people that were in IDM, interactive digital media, which I think is the fastest growing jobs that youth and people want to get trained in on. So think of everything from video games to VR to animation. And we had less than 1%, 0.7% that identified as Indigenous in that space. So we went to work to try to find out what that was. And a lot of it was, once again, there wasn't those safe spaces, but there also wasn't sort of that content that we could work on. And people that have already sort of opened that door for people to come in. I never really told my story before, but then I thought it was important to tell the story. So listening to the preamble, I think it's important to also know that tech are the new no-collar jobs. So I didn't go to university, and I was able to be CEO of a company that we grew to over 200 people and exited on the TSX. So I was able to do my job through mentorship. So I think we have to start thinking of tech as the new no-collar jobs and thinking of it more like trade instead of thinking of it as the only way that you can get a job or the only way you can be an executive is to go to university. That's a great path, but that's also a privileged path. And a lot of people can't do that, especially that come from small towns like me. So I think
Yeah.
that's how we have to kind of reframe that in Canada.
Yeah, I want to get to the mentor question in a second, but Katrina, I want to come to you because you're immersed into the educational, system right now. You haven't chosen an easy path, mechanical engineering. I mean, clearly, you had to have something on the ball to get into the program and succeed there. Um, Give me that your perspective from the educational side of it, because again, Dan emphasizing the fact that education is the foundational backbone of all of this. And then to Josh's point is how do we actually create mentors out of that? But based on your program at Kingston in Queen's University, where do you see that formalized education fitting into what Josh is talking about?
I just want to by saying I was incredibly lucky to grow up in Timmins, so I was able to earn a place at a place like Queen's. But I see education being very important in like the university level because we are tomorrow's engineers and like we are building the future and we're trying to build a way for other people to be able to succeed, like Josh and other people in sectors, the tech sector. Like we want to uplift people and we want to create that space. And so, yeah, I think bringing in these types of conversations to people that are going through school, so they have that framework of thinking like we have to respect Indigenous people, we have to uplift them, and here are the reasons why. I think will just lead to more informed design for all of these engineers that are graduating from Queens.
You realize though, as soon as you graduate, there's a probably more of a responsibility on you because there are going to be kids from Timmins, kids from other First Nations communities across the country who are going to look to you now and think, oh, you did that, now I can do that. Where's your head in that space?
Oh, my head is always in that space. The only reason I think I'm still here is because of my nieces. I want them to be able to look up at me and other Swampy Creek kids to look up at me and see, yeah, we can be here, and then also reach out to me. Be like, these are the steps I took. And I'm really excited to have that responsibility. And I think it is a lot, but it's really exciting as well.
Jen, the idea of being an entrepreneur in Canada at this time in our history is daunting on a good day. Um, Explain to me how your approach to entrepreneurship and how that kind of is integrated into the indigenous cultures in this country, and how do we benefit from what Dan and Cam were talking about in having more awareness of the opportunities flowing both ways.
Yeah, I feel like in our communities in particular, there hasn't been maybe a number of opportunities for our youth because of the obstacles that have been in our pathways. So I really feel personally and from a community level that entrepreneurship is just such a great extra path or a new path or a new way for people to find success. And it is so important. And in particular, right now in Canada, there is a lot of struggles that is coming with entrepreneurship. Conversations from, whether it's geopolitical, uh, we've had to deal with the pandemic. There's multiple reasons why this is challenging, but it's also extremely rewarding. And I feel like we come at business with a really unique perspective in the world and in the space. And we've used innovation to highlight the kinds of products we're bringing into the world and the kind of work we want to do with community. We believe that you can do good and do business at the same time, and so that's something that our brand has always pushed forward. But it's as you said, it's certainly not easy, and I believe that there's just from listening to the earlier comments that there's not just one path, and I really think youth of all types really need to understand there's of course academia as a path, but that's not necessarily the path for everyone, and entrepreneurship is a way to create success and economic sovereignty for you and your family and your community.
Yeah, Zaffia, that requires a good level of courage, though, to be able to do that at any time, and never mind the current circumstances. So when we talk about that tech sector specifically, and the numbers are so low among Indigenous peoples in Canada, how do we sort of
Can I just say something
ignite?
quickly? Because I just keep
Yeah,
hearing you say that Indigenous people in tech is so low. I always like to reframe that with we are less than 5% of the population. So, of course, our numbers in every industry are going to be much lower. And I just want to address that because I feel like that comes across as a negative in some cases for some of us when we're like, the numbers aren't there. And so I just really wanted to address that.
sure. Good point. And I think what's critical is that we need to be looking at the high tech sector as the growth sector, and I think Josh framed it well in the no collar sector. That this is in fact an opportunity for growth. Period. So if we're looking at that, and it's not seen as a more of a or less traditional place for the Indigenous communities to be involved, Zaffia, where do we make that connection? And again, I go back to that level of courage required. There needs to be a certain level of foundational confidence in the community to do what Jen described.
No, definitely. And it's one of those things that I find myself wrapping my head around in terms of how do we use technology, and keep in mind that there's different types of technology. There's the hard manufacturing, agriculture side of things, but there's also the AI, machine learning, the data science of technology as well. So when we talk about Indigenous people in the high technology industry, we also have to take the approach of defining what is high tech, right? We've seen a lot of traditional industries moving into a technology era, but we've also seen a huge influx in new innovative technologies come into Indigenous communities on multiple levels. So, I mean, on the technology side, that's one thing, but the courage that's required is a completely different set of skill set that you're going to have to navigate as well as an entrepreneur. It's not simply just about the technology solutions, but really understanding what is taking place at a community level that you as an individual can bring together people, but also understand that there's multiple phases to building out projects, and that the element of courage is not something that just comes in one wave, but multiple waves as you see the project growing from the initial concept of the idea all the way up until the execution. So, I mean, the simple answer would be courage comes in phases, but if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think it's a good way to look at things in terms of building out the industry overall for where it is and where it's going to be.
But you'd have to do both at the same time, wouldn't you? I mean, you go fast and go together to some degree.
To some degree, yes. But I think one big thing that's not really necessarily spoken about directly, I guess, when we talk about Indigenous people in entrepreneurship and specifically high tech is the emotional kind of toll that comes with it. Because a lot of the times, Indigenous entrepreneurs, specifically, women, as we see on this panel, are wearing many hats in the day-to-day of their own life, but also as an entrepreneur. So there's a lot of things that I think women entrepreneurs and Indigenous entrepreneurs specifically carry in terms of the identity piece that comes into the work that they do. And it's not something that you can just leave at the door. It's something that's interwoven in all of the work that you have. And I think with that, the era that we're in, this reconciliation era and decolonizing era, is that it's often left to the Indigenous entrepreneur to set the stage for what that looks like. But that's completely different than running a startup. You know what I mean? There's the many hats that you wear building startups, but it's a different type of understanding, I guess, when you're an Indigenous person working in a very innovative industry, because it's very intersectional in terms of the work that you do. So I think that's one area that I'd really like to highlight beyond the just going fast and going together.
Well, Josh, based on what Zaffia just said, where's the point where it becomes a struggle then? Because one is a responsibility to the community, et cetera, but at the same time, you've got a responsibility to your startup. Does this make it more difficult for the Indigenous communities to actually be in the entrepreneurial setting?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is all governments need to work together to help and assist with Indigenous entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general. So governments being your, federal, provincial, and Indigenous governments as well. So I think one of the biggest problems is from a grassroots level, really looking at how we're making sure that people know of the opportunities that are now available in the world we live in. I think a lot of the curriculum and uh, how we teach kids is based on 20, 30 years ago. We're not really looking at how quickly people can get into this space or be a solo entrepreneur and they don't have to do business how we've always done business. And secondly, the biggest piece is the funding side of it. How are we making sure that we're giving seed and pre-seed funding to these entrepreneurs to get them going? I mean, that's what I do with Maskwa Investments. Is my mission is just ever since I left Eastside Game is just to try to help Indigenous entrepreneurs get funding. And I thought it would just be writing those seed checks, and um, there would be a series of steps that could go along the way until they're ready to go to a Raven or a BDC to get a bigger investment. But there's nothing in the middle. There's not enough Maskwas, and there's not enough mentorship. And the other piece there is I think it's a challenge with Indigenous entrepreneurs to get the funding, but then to also sort of get that support. We kind of look through entrepreneurship through one lens, and I don't think it's fair. We say like, go out and raise friends and family, raise 150,000 amongst your friends and family, get all of the network, do all these things that you kind of hear in startup culture, and a lot of that we have to build, and we're getting there, but it's going to take a lot longer. One of the things we work with that I didn't think would happen, but happened at Maskwa was there's a lot more hands-on coaching to kind of get entrepreneurs to the next level. But for entrepreneurs that have a very Indigenous product, to make sure that we're defending that product, because when you get into that next round of funding, there tends to be, even if it's well intended, people that have been successful in that space that'll come to give you money. But why don't you make your product a little bit more like this? Why don't you make your product a little bit more like this? Your product becomes that sort of mainstream and loses some of that focus or some of um, your culture that's involved in it. So I think that is the biggest challenge right now, is that funding piece, and also that executive and residence sort of your first board member that comes from that funding. So that's what we really need to go. I know I didn't even answer the question, but that's what I'm constantly thinking about from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep.
Well, okay, but let's pick up on that then. Just the idea of you talked about a more indigenous product. Give me an example of what you mean by that.
I think probably I haven't, like, for example, one of my investments is Indigenous founders, but not an Indigenous product. But the other investment that I did was Spark Agency Group, and they're all they focus on is making sure that we have representatives from Métis, First Nation, and Inuit. We can do effective communications and PR strategies throughout all of Canada right now. So we really wanted to solve that problem to make sure we have that proper representation, but to try to work effectively with both government and private industry. So it's really important for that team to make sure that everyone that joins that team are Indigenous, and that we're growing, and that part of our strategy and part of our goal, part of their strategy and their goal is to make sure that they're also creating space so we can bring on as we grow, we can bring on people and sort of mentor them in that space if they want to do that as a job. So that's really important. So they would never take investment from someone that is not Indigenous, because they would have to align them in what is our core believed goals and what we believe in.
Mm-hmm. If you're just jumping into the feed here right now, thanks for being here. I'm Dave Trafford from Story Studio Network, and this is the Creating Space series, the first of 4 that we are going to engage in over the next 6 or 8 weeks. And so happy to have you aboard. Just if you've joined us, we're here with Josh Nilson. He's at Maskwa Investments. Zaffia Laplante is the CEO at Hempergy. Is that the name of the company? Hempergy? Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I
Yes.
want to ask you more about it. Okay. Good. And Jen Harper is here from Cheekbone Beauty, and Katrina Reimer is a third-year undergraduate engineering student at Queen's University. Want to come back to something that Josh touched on, Katrina, and that was the sort of educational focus. And I think, when you talked about coming to Kingston to go to university at Queen's from your community in Timmins, one of the things that I have encountered when I talk to folks in First Nations communities, we've been talking a lot in the far north and Inuit, etc. They don't actually spend a lot of time teaching the foundational elements to the course that you were going to take. They don't focus on the science. They don't focus on the tech. So is that something that we need to get at foundationally in terms of curriculum in grade school, curriculum in a high school, to make sure that, we plant those seeds early?
Oh, 100%. I think we are kind of reaping what we've sown, by seeing like there aren't that many Indigenous students represented in STEM, but it's increasing but unfortunately, people do have to leave reserve, like their homes, to get the proper education to get to these institutions, and it's not good. I think obviously it's not good. And getting those science classes up to reserves, and just getting excitement in these fields, because a lot of people don't know what an engineer does, and I'm really grateful that I've was able to be in contact with people that showed me opportunities. And I think, yeah, showing opportunities, bringing science teachers, because I think it is a result of kind of just lack of funding, lack of they're up there, let's leave them alone, and oh, they don't even want to learn about this anyway. But that's just not true. We just don't have the resources up there yet. And that should definitely be a focus, and plant those
Yeah,
seeds that we want to sow.
Sure, whether it's resources in terms of education, Jen, we can get into the infrastructure conversation. There are so many areas where, systemically, it creates obstacles, right? I mean, so again, trying to run a business, whatever it might be, is one thing. But what's the biggest obstacle that you see right now in terms of? I mean, Josh sort of outlined a couple of them in terms of where the Indigenous entrepreneur is going to live and thrive.
Did you say Jen? Sorry.
Yeah, I did.
Sorry, yep. I didn't hear that first part. I thought you were still asking Katrina. I think oh my goodness, there's as an entrepreneur, there's about 1 million obstacles that are in our way. Obviously, capital funding is a big one. And in terms of other kinds of resources, it would be skilled people to do, we built what we call an Indigenous Innovation Lab at our headquarters in St. Catharines, and hiring people to work in these specifically skilled jobs it has been super challenging. One, because I think our location is not in a major center like Toronto. We're outside of the city, so that's always been a challenge for us. But capital, I'm definitely in agreement with Josh. So it's a big issue. It was a big issue for us from the beginning, and it's that continued growth, especially when you're in CPG. You're just constantly building, and when you build and grow a brand in CPG, then you need tons of capital to actually hold and maintain all those kinds of inventory. We spent a enormous amount of money on innovation in the early days when we were extracting active ingredients from grape waste, and those kinds of resources are very expensive to employ scientists. So it's really important that capital is driven to the businesses that are actually doing things differently and trying to make change.
Zaffia, where do we land on I guess solving that, or actually addressing that issue of capital? Because it's going to be universal, but if it's particularly more of an issue in Indigenous communities, how do we, grease that wheel?
I mean, I think the funding, or the capital question more so at large, when you're looking at Indigenous communities specifically versus Indigenous entrepreneurs, there's also, the lens that we need to take of Indigenous entrepreneurs that were born and raised or grew up on reserve versus urban Indigenous people. I would consider myself an urban Indigenous woman, and the experiences that I had just, going to school and also through university was I had a lot of access to resources because they were in the same proximity as I was. I went to school in Waterloo, and there was a lot of innovation, programming just outside my front door. But when you're looking at communities in Northern Ontario, across the entire country, bringing that knowledge and that skill to community is one hurdle. And then having people that are actually coming back and ensuring that it's being implemented is a whole other part of the conversation as well. So we need to look at the differences of Indigenous people or Indigenous entrepreneurs coming from on reserve versus urban. And then also, how do we bring high-skilled people, like Jen was saying, to communities for the youth, like Katrina was also saying, to have the skill set at a young age and maybe not later when they get to university. It's a different approach to supporting the ecosystem at a younger standpoint, but it takes multiple approaches to actually get that done, I think.
So, Josh, if we take that example and and we look outward, how much of this is also about making the non-Indigenous community aware of the opportunities in working with Indigenous companies and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think it's just building really cool stuff and being at the forefront and making sure we're celebrating our success and working together. About 4 years ago, we started talking about when we went to tech events that there was only one or two Indigenous people there. We would always find each other and hang out and chat. And now, 4 years later, we have a group called Indigenous Tech Circles. So if you're in Indigenous and in tech, you should check it out. It's a nonprofit, and we have over 400 members. So it just goes to show that there needs to be spaces that we can talk and collaborate together, and just keep doing our thing. I think there's lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff that is that people are building, that is coming up, and I think the way that we kind of get other people to be involved and to look at is to continue to be successful on what we do. You look at some of the brands that have done that. I like street fashion because as a 51-year-old man, I'm never grown up, so I still love wearing just hoodies all the time. So look at a brand like Section 35 that was in BC, and Justin's been able to grow that brand to, worldwide. But it was meant for Indigenous people first, but now it's a brand that anyone can wear, and represent. And I think that's amazing. I think more of that stuff is coming. What Jen's doing is amazing as well. And I think it's coming. I think that's why it's important to make sure that as we get that investors or early supporters, that we make sure that we don't dilute that brand, which kind of in the finance world is kind of what they want to do right away because it makes sense. And as we go into this next phase of our nation, Canada, whatever that looks like over the next few years, I think that's what non-Indigenous people should look for, is supporting Indigenous companies and looking at that and looking at not only buying local, but think about buying Indigenous. It really does make a difference. Supporting, uh, liking, boosting, doing all that stuff. These are the businesses that are going to power Canada in the future, and these are great investments. It's the only thing I invest in with my company.
So, Jen, then, are people coming to you to buy cosmetics because you are an Indigenous entrepreneur, or are they coming to you because of the product itself, first and foremost?
That is a great question. In the early days, I would get asked this question all the time, which I find very irritating. Was our brand just for Indigenous people?
Right.
No one would ever go to Lancome and say, is this just for French people? So of course it's not. And I would be a really stupid businesswoman if I was making a product that was just for Indigenous people when we're less than 5% of the global population. So our products were made for everyone. And when people discover Cheekbone Beauty, we have an incredible origin story. Not only my personal journey into sobriety, completely turning my life around and building something that has become a really well-known, recognizable brand in Canada. They find out about that and they love the idea of supporting an Indigenous business. And then they try our products. Our industry standard in CPG is like a 30% customer return rate. Cheekbone Beauty proudly holds a 65 customer return rate, and 95% of our customers are not Indigenous. And the feedback that we get from them on products is it's unbelievable. It's something I'm so proud of. And the truth is, I've been doing this for 10 years now and had made an enormous amount of mistakes in the early days. Did not focus on the product for the first few years. And once we did, we've just seen this massive transition. Again, I was learning. I was selling fish before I started this cosmetics company. So I knew nothing about the beauty space. And there's just more evidence that I really believe that if anybody has an idea and is super passionate about it, you can build a lab, hire a scientist, and make whatever incredible products you want to.
So to be clear, when you talk about return rate, those are customers that are coming back. They're not returning your product.
No, sorry. Yes, they're coming
Right.
back. They're coming back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So proud of that. And we've even been able to now, when we look at the data, we used to have it would be a 6 months that they were coming back. Now we have them down to one, and they're between 1 and 3 when they're returning for more products. So we find that really fascinating, which just to us means we got to keep innovating and making more incredible products for people to buy.
Zaffia, you're in the sort of the climate advocacy space, among other things. And what I have learned over the last 3 years doing work with a number of Indigenous First Nations communities around resource, around environment, is that we are coming to the conclusion in Western science that, hey, there's some really great ways to approach these issues. And what it amounts to is traditional wisdom from First Nations and Indigenous communities across the country. That, in fact, the Indigenous peoples in this country understood that they had to live. You have to live with the environment. And now our forestry sector is coming around to that. Our mining sector is coming around to understanding that. So the old wisdom is the new science. Where does that put you in terms of where you are in the tech sector?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really interesting question because it actually came from when I was studying in Haida Gwaii. I studied ethnobotany and Indigenous systems in Haida Gwaii, one of the only rainforest in Canada. And part of my class was that we were taught, by non-Indigenous and Indigenous professors, first and foremost, but we also had an experiential learning piece to it. So we'd learn in the morning from our professors, and then in the afternoon, we'd go out on the land and, for example, identify plants or identify different parts of the ocean or different algae species. But with that, we had the privilege of having local elders come in and teach us the Haida methods of harvesting rosebuds or harvesting seaweed. And I think that is a big piece of, one, education, but two, bridging the knowledge between Indigenous, environmental ecological knowledge and traditional knowledge with biotechnology. Not only the methods of planting or harvesting or processing things, but the stories that come behind it too, and the interrelation between so many microclimates or microenvironments or relationships, to get a whole perspective of, it's not just that the community has this necessarily knowledge, but it actually is very complementary to how Western or, the current science kind of dates things. It's really quite interesting to have experiences like that, which I think are really unique. And it will definitely shape the future of, climate tech, but also the way that a lot of work is done at a community level as well, I think, because it's not simply focusing on one method. It's really using that two-eyed seeing approach where you have Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge as well, walking, down a very similar path for the same outcome. But I think we're just in that phase of development, I think, for the reconciliation conversation with that kind of climate perspective on it as well to come into place. And I look forward to conversations surrounding that, just given my background in advocacy and whatnot.
Yeah, it occurs to me that the traditional knowledge, the traditional wisdom of the elders is actually a connective tissue here in the conversation that just makes it stronger, for one thing. But I have found that the scientists in our academic institutions are looking at it with a different lens. That in fact, Zaffia, they look at it and say, "Oh, we were overthinking it,
Fully.
or we were really blind to these issues that were in front of us."
Fully. I mean, when I was in studying, ethnobotany, we heard stories from elders that, talk about Haida people coming to certain parts of the island, however many thousands of years ago. And they actually had archaeologists come in and do carbon dating on some of the canoes and totem poles that date back to the same, era that the Haida people, their stories were talking about. So science actually has caught up, and they've done carbon dating, and it shows how far back the oral storytelling actually goes, and there's science to prove it. And that is the part that makes me very excited, because we have been in such a loss of knowledge and reparations of things that were lost from a cultural identity lens, but also environment. And now that the science is not only caught up and validated, it's like, what else needs to be done? I think it's just the wave is just started, and it's so exciting to be an Indigenous woman in the STEM space right now, especially because this is something that's just happening in Canada, but there's Indigenous people around the world that can benefit from technologies like this for knowledge preservation, language preservation, and environment restoration as well. So hopeful
Yeah,
wishing.
agree. Katrina, the idea that sort of the value of the elder knowledge, the value of the cultural historic knowledge, we don't think of it. Or I guess at some point we in the Western world didn't think of it as being innovative. But when I talked to the folks up in Nunavut recently, they're stressing the fact that the Inuit were innovators who innovated and invented the kayak, who invented, the snow goggles, who invented the sealskin jacket that would repel the rain and the snow and the cold and all of those things. And they did that through a very harsh environment, right? Because they had to do it. I'm just curious because now you are very much involved in sort of that Western culture setting in terms of your science and technology studies. Where does that traditional knowledge play in terms of your approach now to becoming a mechanical engineer?
Um, I guess I would say I look at every engineering problem I face with a very balanced thinking. I grew up with the seven grandfather teachings and the medicine wheel being a very focused, or it's very sacred, and that's how my mind works. And in my first year design class, I remember being taught the three P's, which is people, profit, planet. And I'm like, it almost was a little silly, because it's like, how are we not already thinking about all of these things while trying to solve a problem? How are we not thinking about our impact on people rather than just who we're building for? So But I've also found, I just want to mention this, in my time in these institutions, kind of seeing the deeply instilled and embedded hierarchical thinking. And so we aren't looking at elders as an actual innovative knowledge source, unfortunately, because people in these institutions and those influenced by them see others as less than if they're not the same or above in what they've been taught to see as above. So I think that's why the education, and bringing in knowledge keepers and elders, and even making design classes designed for some of the issues First Nations are facing, would really bring in that collaboration. And like I'm sorry, I think I answered the question. I kind of got lost there, but
No, I think you're right, and I love the idea that this was immediately culturally how you approached your view of science, your view of knowledge, your view of the world, and that idea of the elders and what they're bringing to it. I think here's and I go back to the comment I made off the top vis-a-vis you. the responsibility then is more or less with this generation of new scientists who come from Indigenous communities to be able to emphasize, highlight, articulate not just the value of the traditional approaches and thinking, but the actual need, the necessity to make it part of the solution, to make it part of the innovation. It is at the heart of the innovation.
Yeah, I fully agree. At Queen's right now, we transitioned to Smith, so there's this huge thing for reimagining engineering. And honestly, I think indigeneity is the missing piece in this high sector. Like, indigeneity comes with such a balanced thinking, and there's been so much erasure of actual like success stories, actual just knowledge, and I think that was just to keep us like out of these sectors because as we see with our other panelists, you let indigenous people in this space or not even let them, they're breaking down barriers. You see how far we go, and I don't think other people want to see that. But yeah, if we come back and just talk about the knowledge we have and actually support that and support each other, then we definitely will see an influx of Indigenous people in this space and proper collaboration.
Yeah, I guess, Jen, that gets at the whole idea of a mentor. I mean, you all in your own worlds are mentors and at different levels, but no offense, but I think Katrina is the one who's going to lead the way for us in the next, generation.
Completely agree. Here's the thing. Indigenous people, they are the OGs of sustainability. Like that is just the facts. And they just haven't been invited to these tables where a lot of these decisions are being made. And what Katrina is saying is that there's so much truth in that. Like those 7 grandfather teachings are absolutely real values and principles that many of our communities have been guided by. And when we see innovation in a Western viewpoint, we see the disaster of what's happening with, I'm not going to mention names, but, people, humans, think they have all the answers because they lack humility. Then they think they're solving the problem. And yet with the electric car, batteries require lithium. And now what are we doing to the planet? And how much lithium are we mining? And what wars are we starting in order to get more lithium, in order to make more of those cars so we can become richer? And so that's not how Indigenous people view business, and business in terms when it comes to making an impact as well. We literally look at this in such a different viewpoint through a different lens. And that's why for us, these conversations around regular VC tables or business meetings are a lot different and harder for us to have.
So, Zaffia, how do we deal with that? I mean, let me ask you, who was your mentor, somebody that you look to and actually you could point to and say, because of my engagement with them, whether they knew it or not, they may not know, you are doing what you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll start with kind of like a role model, I will say first, because I think that's really important as well. Believe it or not, Jen, you were actually like very much my role model when you started your entrepreneurship journey. And I saw the work that you were doing with Cheekbone. I said, oh my God, like she's an Indigenous woman in an industry that's very mainstream and she's breaking down, so many barriers by getting into it. And I'm like that, like literally, I'm sure I said this to my friends in university, like that's who I want to grow up and be like when I'm older, because you were doing such meaningful work and like knowing that the funding was going back into communities. And like, that's exactly the method of business that I want to be a part of. And when I was starting my journey as a, university student in second year at Laurier in the cannabis industry, everybody thought I was insane as well, because I did not study biology or, anything like this. I studied politics. So the mentors that I had really understood me as an individual, all the intersectionalities that I carried and all of the quirks and, things that I wanted to do. But it was really, really difficult to sometimes articulate the work that I was doing, because it wasn't about building a product or making a service and then helping communities after. It was working directly with communities from the beginning throughout the entire kind of project life cycle that I did, with a great product as well. It wasn't one or the other. I can name, 2 mentors off the top of my head. One who was a professor that believed in me and all of my crazy ideas. He's now recently retired, but Edmund Pries at Laurier, he believed in me in and out of the classroom. He helped me so much, as a young student, as a young Indigenous student, as an entrepreneur, on all the different labels that I carried, I guess you could say. And then Dr. Andrew Judge, who I don't think he knew it at the time, but he was definitely my mentor, being an Indigenous man that got his PhD in Indigenous methodologies, but also spent a lot of time working on the land in the agriculture industry. Again, someone that I thought, that is so cool what he's doing. And he's doing such meaningful work. And I also get to be a part of it and see this come to life as well. Yeah, many mentors, obviously, but those are two that I can say, if it wasn't for you being there or existing or believing in me, I really do not think that I would be on this podcast with you both, with you all, sorry, not both, with you all today. Yeah.
Well, and Josh, we can't underestimate the value of that sentiment. I want to be like you. I mean, I don't think that can't be taught. That it really is ingrained in somebody's approach to life.
Yeah, you can't teach work ethic. You have to learn it. And I think I hauled so much wood as a kid. That's why I decided to be an entrepreneur, because I never want to stack or go get wood again in my life. So I owe that all to my little single. I call her my little mom, my little Métis mom, because she just worked me and my friends so hard. And I think that's where we really, decided to have that entrepreneurial spirit, have that hustle. And I want to go back to one comment, because I think it's really important for people that are listening, that it's really important, the comment Jen made about it's really hard for Indigenous people to get into those rooms that the VCs are at or that board members are at, because the tables are already set, and the tables usually don't, they kind of look the same how they've looked since the 1950s. Not much has changed, even though maybe some values have changed, and maybe some products have changed or some viewpoints have changed. The decision makers really haven't changed. So there's two things that I always talk about in there. One of them is I always remember hearing walk through every door like your ancestor opened it for you. So I always think about that. And then I always think about, for people like me that are privileged, that are sitting at that table, it's not enough just to be at that table and give your viewpoint. You should be making sure you're open. It's a different thing to be sitting at the table and telling a viewpoint than it is to invite somebody in that usually isn't allowed at that table and say, sit next to me. I sit in these meetings all the time. I'll explain them to you. And don't worry, if you have any questions, just let me know. You belong here. So that's a totally different thing. And I think what we need to think about is, if there's only 7 chairs at that table, don't worry about it. In the house that I grew up, if there's only 7 chairs, well, then you share a chair with somebody, or you bring in a piece of wood and sit on that. Like, there's an unlimited amount of chairs in my mom's house, so there should be an unlimited amount of chairs in a boardroom, especially if they want to change. So we really have to think about that. And that's one of my missions, to try to do that. So what can you do if you're not Indigenous and you want to um, uh, make sure you're growing that part of your business, or this is something that's important to you? Then invite people in and listen, and have those extra chairs or have those pieces of wood that they can sit at and have those conversations. I think that is sort of the next step. And I think for Indigenous people that are listening, if they want to think of a place like where to start, because maybe education isn't their path or they're not able to do that, there's more resources than have ever been out there. Like, look at all the cool stuff. Like, I really love what the Bears Lair group is doing. Watch Bears Lair, watch people pitching, watch people doing that. They have a great podcast. They take that on the road, and they teach different nations how to go through and pitch and have that. Attend Imaginative and see what Indigenous people are making in the IDM space. It's so inspiring and amazing. And if you don't know how to do it because you're overwhelmed, hit me up and I'll have 25 different things that you can look at or experience today.
So just before we go, Jen, I just want to close the loop on that, and Josh indicating that's what non-Indigenous companies should be doing, providing more seats at the table, et cetera. It doesn't mean necessarily assigning seats at the table. There's a difference. Where in your view, do you think we are with that integration of the non-Indigenous, Indigenous communities to each other's benefit, as opposed to being siloed.
There's still a lot of work to do. There really is. But, we've been really fortunate, I feel, as a brand, and as an entrepreneur that's an Indigenous woman in Canada. There has been an enormous amount of support for us from the beginning. And even though I still recognize there's still such a long way to go, I really want to show so much gratitude for the uplifting that happens. But it's remembering that there's so many more of us. And then now, like Josh just said, I feel like I have a personal role to continue to help lift people up, invite them into space. Like, Katrina and Zaffia, you guys are just, there's the brilliance here is just phenomenal. And like you said earlier, Dave, like what the future holds is because of these people that are also here, and what they're going to be able to contribute is incredible. But we all have that job of like lifting one another up. And the spaces, when you get into those rooms with people, the hardest thing I've learned is never to hold back anymore. Like, let my voice be heard and ask for help, because I don't know anything. I've made so many mistakes doing this, and I don't want that for the next generation or someone that has a brilliant idea. I want to share with them now, here's all the things that I did wrong, but also recognizing that everyone is also on their own path. But I think just making the space opening, welcoming, and having those bold conversations that take a lot of courage with a lot of non-Indigenous folks in all kinds of different sectors and industries, and say, look, this is great that you've done this so far, but there's still so much more room and space to grow, and if you really want us here.
Zaffia, final thought?
No, just echoing everything Jen has said. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a concept that I'd like to introduce, I think, for any, everybody here as well, because I recently came across it. But the quadruple helix approach, which involves community, academia, private and public enterprises all together. So all four of them. In order for real, meaningful, impactful change to happen, we need all four of those stakeholders like at the table, having conversations, because we can have innovation being pushed from the public sector. We can have academia supporting Indigenous researchers, but we also need like the community to have the space and time and platforms to speak about these issues without it falling into, a one-size-fits-all approach to talking about these issues. We need to have like representation from all ends of the spectrum of Indigenous entrepreneurs in all industries, and understanding that an entrepreneur doesn't necessarily mean somebody that's selling a product, but also service or part of preserving the cultural identity that is being erased. We need to get, I think, out of our minds that an entrepreneur is simply somebody that's like a business person or selling a product or service. Like, there's a lot of different types of entrepreneurs, many different industries, and you don't have to sacrifice what you bring to the table for the benefit of making dollars. But we need all four of those stakeholders to work together to understand that, to see a real impactful shift. And like I said, I'm hopeful because of the innovation that I've seen from, within the climate kind of clean tech industry, and what Katrina's talking about just in terms of the work that she's doing. There's definitely a shift. It's just how long, I think, for it to be widespread adopted. So.
Well, I guess in some respects, Katrina, the line is, you don't waste a good crisis. And in many respects, we are at one in this country vis-a-vis our sovereignty, our climate, our economy. And not to put a pall on this conversation, because I think it's been really productive. But I think there's a real opportunity here now, because you've got the attention of so many people on so many levels, that what you're talking about, what Jen, Zaffia, and Josh are talking about, rises to the top in terms of order of conversation. These are people are having conversations about the very things that we've discussed today, finally.
Yeah, definitely. And I just wanted to end with the fact that a path is formed by walking. That has been something very close to me and what I've been trying to do. And I think what everyone else is saying. When we create space for ourselves, we're creating space for each other. And it is our responsibility as we're walking that path to clear the way so more people can come with us. And I think the more like non-Indigenous people are willing to walk a new, maybe uncharted path, explore a bit, because there will be mistakes along the way, like every venture. But we build relationships along the way. I think that's how we get closer to like true reconciliation and collaboration. Just seeing it as like, this is our lives, we're walking together. Let's learn about each other.
Well, we've taken a good step in that direction today. So I thank all of you for being here. And again, Josh Nilson, Zaffia Laplante, Jen Harper, and Katrina Reimer, thank you. And this has been our first of 4 offerings for the Creating Space series. And just a reminder that we will be launching a live event number 2, the Indigenous Solutions for High Demand Sectors. That's going to be April 10th, and it will be at 12 p.m. Eastern Time stream. So again, join us for that. And if you're just catching the tail end of this, we'll have it available to you on online as well. So there's no reason why you can't pick this up and watch and listen on demand. Thanks for this. I'm Dave Trafford from Story Studio Network.